So our first speaker will be Helena Gonzales with Native Seed Search, Native Seeds with an S, Seeds Search. Helena Gonzales graduated from the University of Arizona with a bachelor's degree in plant science, focusing on genetics, genomics, and propagation. Born and raised in Tucson, she is Hopi and Navajo. Helena has dedicated her life to crop conservation and research, preserving the diversity and history of heirloom crops. Next will be Amy June Breesman, local context. Amy June is a seed keeper, artist, and researcher born and raised in the Mid-Atlantic and currently resides in Lawrence, Kansas, where she co-manages Goodway Farm. She collaborates with local context to promote data sovereignty and affirm Indigenous peoples' rights to their cultural and biological materials and diverse knowledge. And last, we'll have Jamie Chevalier of Quail Seeds. Jamie is the owner of Quail Seeds in Northern California's Coast Range. She's been growing and foraging food for 45 years. For the last 20 years, she has focused on preserving and adapting open pollinated seeds and raising awareness of seed and soil issues among home and subsistence gardeners. So my first question will be directed to Helena. What should we know? What should we know about community?
Hi, my name is Helena Gonzales. I work with Native Seed Search as the seed bank manager. So I work at Native Seed Search as the conservation of the seeds. And I'm gonna go and give a little bit into intellectual property from the Indigenous perspective, and a little intro into Native Seed Search a little further on. Intellectual property from an Indigenous perspective. Intellectual property laws provide legal protection for products and allow a person or entity to own the products of their creation, to control the uses of these products by others, and to be rewarded for third-party use. Legal systems relying on private ownership and unique material products are incompatible and often contradictory to Indigenous peoples' traditions and definitions relating to the access and sharing of knowledge, cultural materials, resources, responsibilities, and management. The ideology of gatekeeping knowledge or designs for individual benefits, like social status, personal gain, monetary wealth, etc., is foreign in the practice of the current national system. A slide a little bit on traditional farming. Copyright. The Indigenous creators can sometimes use copyright protections, but the requirements of it exclude protection for traditional works. Cultural materials like oral stories, designs, and other traditional expressions are very challenging to protect. Patents usually benefit non-Indigenous entities and use Indigenous knowledge, materials, and resources. Indigenous communities face many challenges in patenting or protecting their traditional knowledge. Trademarks and designs. Indigenous communities can register specific cultural symbols or designs as trademarks, but often lack the resources to maintain a multitude of trademarks. Designs are also incredibly problematic for protection as they only apply to specific products, limiting the protection of traditions, art, or materials that are not meant to be used commercially. So native seed search. That's that part. So Native Seed Search is a nonprofit based in Tucson, Arizona, that stewards traditional seeds of the greater Southwest. Our mission is to conserve and share the seeds of the people of the desert Southwest in Mexico so that the arid adopted crops may benefit communities and nourish a changing world. Native Seed Search was formed in response to the rapid loss of seed diversity since the early 1900s. Crop loss means an inevitable reduction in genetic diversity representing thousands of years of evolution and efforts gone forever. Threats to traditional heirloom seeds and wild crop relatives arose because of industrial agriculture, rapid expansion, globalization, environmental change, and policy decisions. Native Seed Search was started 40 years ago out of a desire to conserve culturally important agricultural seeds, to reconnect the seeds with their communities of origin and make the seeds widely available for conservation. The organization spent the first 20 years collecting the seeds and the last 20 stewarding and sharing those seeds. The bulk of the seeds in the collection were collected in the 1980s and 90s through donations from farmers, families of farmers, seed collectors, seed traders, and from seeds purchased at farmers and local markets. These seeds are the product of generations of farmers, most of them indigenous, selecting, nurturing, and sharing seeds to best suit the land and people of their communities. Native Seed Search and these seeds would not exist without the indigenous communities who shared and saved the seeds and continue to farm these crops today. In our seed bank at Native Seed Search, we have over 1,800 accessions and 100 species. The majority of them are corn, beans, and squash, with more than 70% from indigenous communities. The collection represents the cultural heritage and farming knowledge of around 50 indigenous communities, with more than half of the collection of the seeds from Mexico. Native Seed Search started developing their seed policy specifically after COVID-19 and the rush to buy seeds. There was a need to clarify how the organization stewarded and shared the seeds. And most concern was around sharing the seeds, how to engage with indigenous stakeholders, and have more transparency, consultation, and the organizational accountability. The process took about a year and involved reviews from Native and non-Native voices outside of the organization. For the Native seed policy, There was a prompt to change the organization and the bylaws. We now aim to have 50% permanent representation from the tribes on our board of our directors. And included in the changes, informal practices, formal programs, and made sure through the policy that a clear process for seed rematriation and restrictions and defined tribal relations were made. And it created a general seed restriction based on conservation and relationship. Native seed search's leadership had become more representative, and Native Seed Search Policy Committee plays a central role in decision-making when it comes to the seeds and policies. Sharing with others to provide an example of policies around seed sharing and stewardship. We have a good display of some of the beans we have in our collection and the variety. Native Seed Search is dedicated to conserving the rich agrobiodiversity of the Southwest. So the purpose of the Native Seed Search policy is to provide a guiding document for the organization on how to best steward our seeds in the collection, or more better said, the community of seeds in the collection, for multiple purposes and for bringing them back to the communities that they're from. The policy includes collection management, documentation, health concerns of the seeds, and relations with regional indigenous communities, and outlines any guidelines for research to be done as well. The document's available online at nativeseedsearch.org if anybody wants to review and go through it. So what Native Seed Search does. With acknowledging the seeds and their origin, we grow and share heirloom seeds to regenerate and conserve for the future. We provide these seeds to individuals, community organizations, schools, farmers, and tribes who have historical and cultural connections to them. We have our native access seeds that are designated and prioritize indigenous communities when the seeds are in limited supply. For our outreach, we provide resources and training on seed saving, seed banking, and traditional farming. Native Seed Search developed an engagement aimed at fostering relationships with tribes, with traditional farmers, and provides consultations and respects cultural practices. For rematriation, a policy currently supports rematriation by enabling original donors or descendants to request seed returns with a consultation process for non-donor specified seeds for rematriation. Our research, the policy mandates that research on Indigenous affiliated seeds include an outreach plan to share findings with affiliated communities and prohibits commercial outcomes. It prioritizes Indigenous-led research proposals, aligning with treaty requirements on benefit sharing and cultural sensitivity. Seeds are important to communities. We also have available ADAPTS, which is the public-facing database. All the information of our seeds, all the seeds that we have in our collection can be accessed through ADAPTS. Native seed search documents detailed information on each seed accession, including origin, affiliation, and traditional uses that can be found on our website. And a little bit on what can groups and organizations, companies, institutions do more for the communities in recognition of the origin of seeds, or in recognition of origin of traditional materials. There's acknowledgement of legacy and accountability. Seed acknowledgements can be given. Addressing legacy in greater depth to demonstrate transparency and commitment to improving community trust. Requiring explicit permissions with each tribe for items of cultural significance and formalizing agreements. Ensuring that Indigenous consent is documented, honoring standards and respecting communal ownership structures. Emphasis can be done on relational accountability rather than just scientific stewardship. This is recognizing Indigenous governments and protocols, and also cultural perspectives. Balancing perspectives with traditional perspectives and methods in these organizations or companies. There are occasional Western biases that don't acknowledge traditional methods. Acknowledgements can also be made to access materials, and that those access may be guided by traditional or ceremonial protocols, acknowledging that it can be a part of it. Reframing, also a more empowering language involved and framework, reframing stewardship to reflect relational care to seeds. Expanding community involvement can also be done, and terms can be expanded to be more inclusive of regional diversity and acknowledgement. This research and work was done by the help of Tommy Jody and presented by me. Thank you.
All right. Whenever we're live, we can get going. Thank you so much for tech assistance. I'm not good at this stuff. And speaking in front of people under lights is also not my favorite thing. But here we are. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Good afternoon. It's so nice to be here with you all. I have known some of you a little bit, but most of you are new friends. So I'm really glad to be here in this space with you. Thank you, Tessa Peters, for the invitation and the entire organizing committee. This is running really smoothly. So props to facilitators and everyone behind the scenes making this happen. It's kind of a hot mic. Okay. So a bit about me. My name's Amy June. I use she and her pronouns. I joined this organization, Local Context, I'm representing today just about 5 months ago. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, and I'm also from a lineage of Wyandotte ancestors, as well as those of Irish, German, and other European settler descent. I was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. area in the Chesapeake Bay region, or said another way, Piscataway homelands. I currently make my home in Lawrence, Kansas, on the homelands of the Kaw and Osage. I I studied photography as an undergraduate. Wow, this little slider thing is crazy. And I had a lot of notes here. So anyway, I studied photo as an undergraduate, and where'd I go? Okay, thank you. I'm like, what has happened in my life? I only understand if I read it off a page. Anyway, I studied photo. I have no formal science background. I came into the crop breeding space, sort of crash course style, after joining the Land Institute about 2 years ago, but I've been a farmer for about 5 years. My partner and I co-manage a small nonprofit farm to support gift economy and sort of solidarity economy systems in our little community. So we grow food and seed to give away. And that's why I do what I do and why I care about the work of local context as well. This is a pretty new space for local context to be in. So I'll give some organizational background. Local context started in 2010 as an intervention to bring Indigenous cultural authority back into cultural heritage spaces. This came about in response to conversations with communities who had been let down by colonial legal structures, like many of what we've heard about today. These legal frameworks, as we've noted, still fall short of asserting Indigenous people's rights as rights holders to their own cultural heritage. We grew out of research projects in the US and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and just registered as an independent nonprofit in 2022. So we are pretty fresh on the scene. So because of the colonial legacy of many institutions and how Indigenous peoples' materials and data were gathered in the first place, significant information is often missing. This is true in museums, and we've also heard a little bit about what might be missing in records like GRIN database fields, for example. Information like community names may have been excluded, not considered important, or even incorrectly recorded, as often happens. This misinformation and misattribution continues to affect communities' ability to find information and reassert control over their own data. Skip this, I've slammed GRIN enough today. Let's see. So, because of the way that intellectual property law operates, communities are largely not the legal rights holders, which leads to a lack of control and governance, leaving openings for misuse. You may note that one's country has to be a signatory to the recent WIPO Treaty on, I don't know if folks saw this, but sort of disclosing communities of origin if that information is known, in addition to the country of origin when you're applying for a patent if you are a WIPO signatory. So considering that there are more researchers working with Indigenous peoples and data than ever before in this era of big and open data, these mistakes and omissions which exist in projects, reports, and metadata reproduce the marginalization of these communities and amplify erasure of their differences. And to make matters worse, because this data is carried from one data set to the next, the mistakes and omissions can be exponentially replicated in the far-reaching digital forms of the material. With these issues, the Indigenous communities that our founders worked with and continue to work with were looking for a way to intervene and interrupt these systems. Thus began local contexts. Just in case anyone doesn't have enough to read, I just wanted to throw this slide up here to say you should read these if you're curious about learning more about Indigenous data sovereignty. What else is covered here? Everything good. So snap a picture if you don't already have a too long reading list. And at the bottom here are some of our collaborators, close collaborators, and folks who have helped sort of develop the local context system in tandem with our founders. Okay, so this map shows you our global connections of communities, institutions, and researchers who are interested in or already using the local context system. So don't let me misrepresent this as people who are already taking and running with this system. But it's folks who have showed interest as well as implemented the system. As you can see, our connections are especially strong in North America and Oceania, which is where our team has been based so far. We imagine that this will grow as our team is able to grow. We primarily work in English, but we are growing to support other languages and translation abilities within our system. So the local context labels and notices are sort of the meat and potatoes of the issue. The local context traditional knowledge labels were created first through iteration and partnership with Indigenous communities as a tool for intervention in those colonial legal systems. These were followed by notices for institutions and researchers, and most recently, and perhaps most pertinent to this group, the biocultural labels were developed for things like herbaria managers, this sort of thing. Both the labels and notices are, simply put, extra legal digital tools. They are not legally binding. They are markers of Indigenous rights, interests, and cultural authority that can be used in a wide range of contexts. These are accessed, I'll mention this again a little bit later, but they're basically accessed through an API in our hub, which is not a language that I speak, but that's how it works. And you can also download these images and apply them to different material. So the local context labeling system supports Indigenous communities to assert their cultural authority and sovereignty back into spaces which have otherwise been missing this information. Communities can use the labels to clearly state the provenance, protocols, and permissions of certain materials. They're a way to keep Indigenous rights and interests with collections and data as they move through different digital environments. And the labels were designed to be flexible. So a label may be applied more generally to an entire collection or more specifically to a given plant variety or heirloom species. Most recently, in addition to the traditional knowledge labels, were these 10 biocultural labels designed to support community expectations for biocultural collections and data. So these might be in botanical gardens, gene banks, or seed collections. The BC labels support Indigenous people's right to decide how collections and data that have come from their lands, waters, and other instances of bioinformatics are used. The label's meanings are related to 3 categories of provenance, or where something comes from, protocols, or how it should be accessed in the future, and permissions, or how it should be used. So here are some labels in action on the Library of Congress's website. These are integrated into the Passamaquoddy tribe's archived materials. These labels identify the community's expectations around attribution, educational use, and non-commercialization. By clicking on the labels, it'll take you to this full customized text, which the community has built to include a title in their own language, additional information about the labels, and they also link out to their website for viewers to learn more from the community themselves. Here, the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans in present-day Wisconsin are applying the labels to physical materials like these garden interpretation signs and related exhibition materials. The labels that you see in use here are BC verified, outreach, and non-commercial. These mark that the garden and information being shared is verified by the Stockbridge-Munsee and is shared for educational purposes and indicates that the information there is not to be used for commercial purposes. Okay, so TK and BC labels that we've covered so far are to be used by and for Indigenous communities themselves, but we recognize that those who are holding Indigenous collections and data also have a role to play in this work. Namely, there is a responsibility to disclose Indigenous collections and accessions and data. And to help with that, we created these notices. So the notices were generated to create pathways for partnership, collaboration, and support of Indigenous cultural authority. The notices can assist communities in locating their knowledge, belongings, relatives, ancestors, and so on, and become part of the decision-making about their access and use. The hope is that this also helps to disperse some of the labor involved for communities to find and access their data back onto institutions, who often will have greater familiarity with the data and materials rather than a community needing to do that legwork. Unlike the labels, the notices will remain the same wherever they're used. The icon, title, and text all are fixed as a simplified marker of Indigenous collections. We describe these also in 3 categories, which each communicate different Indigenous interests. So we have engagement, disclosure, and collections care notices. Here we see the Academy of Natural Sciences of Drexel University using the Open to Collaborate notice on their homepage of their website. In addition to the homepage, they've applied a biocultural notice to their Lewis and Clark herbarium, which are the plant specimens collected by Lewis and Clark. Of course, these were collected from Indigenous lands, and the records do contain Indigenous knowledge, so they're using this notice to make that more apparent. This is a step that they're taking as they embark on a multi-year project to create an exhibition which centers Indigenous perspectives. So a somewhat unique example that I wanted to share with this group is Newfields Museum's use of notices on this particular ancestor figure. They've revoked public viewing or use of the item by those who are not part of the community of origin and paired it with the attribution incomplete notice. This allows collections managers to note that they have not verified how an object should be viewed, utilized, and shared. And just wanted to sort of connect that to scholar Eve Tuck's work. She introduces the concept of the right of refusal from Indigenous peoples to participate or be studied. This is a crucial question to consider if complex in crop breeding and patenting. So as a fictitious example, if a given seed company joined local contexts as an institution and reached out to the 3 federally recognized bands of Shawnee to work with them on ancestral varieties, and those communities said no, how can you honor that? What are the creative ways that we might think to continue to advance our work for more just food systems while upholding Indigenous peoples' right of refusal? How can we flex our openness to share germplasm appropriately? And can we develop stronger systems of support when working with plants that have ethnobotanical histories? Just food for thought. So much of the work that we do at Local Context is facilitated through an online portal. We call it the Local Context Hub. It's the digital space where we host researchers, institutions, and Indigenous communities. This is where we post projects. You can pull API and other technical data and create and share both labels and notices. An important distinction is to make that we are not a data repository, so we do not host your data. Rather, we team up with other data hosts who are part of our integration partner program to develop those technical interfaces for your data sets. Okay, so now for the fun part. Imagining what this might look like as crop breeders, farmers, seed companies, and others working to address IP issues in plant materials. On the left is what a seed catalog project might look like in the hub. And on the right is our seed store, my seed store, where we give away stuff, to sort of show you what notices being applied to a web store might look like. And these are notices because, again, I have not gone through the due diligence of working with a community to develop labels for specific seeds. Here's also just an example of what a seed packet might look like. Usually we have sort of norms around how the labels, titles, and text are presented. We don't have a case of anybody using these on seed packets yet. So this is just deep mock-up style, like what it might look like. The full text is impractical, and we recognize that. So this is an interesting space to be in, and I welcome any feedback about how we might make this work. All right, so wrapping up, we always recommend starting to work with these tools in the Sandbox Hub. If you're curious, this is like a fee-free way to just get in there and see if you like the interface and like how it might work with your systems. This QR code will take you directly to the Sandbox Hub. Some functionalities are limited in the test hub, so what to share about that? There's a fee for service right now for institutions. Researcher accounts are free and community accounts will always remain free. But right now, if you're in the Sandbox Hub and you're not a subscribing institution or you don't have one of those free accounts, you will have some limitations in how you can test, just to name that. Other important things to note is that we have very frequent info sessions and hub demonstrations. So if you want to be involved in this conversation, if you're curious to know more, we have regional hubs that you can connect with. We have an Indigenous Peoples Working Group, and other ways to sort of tap in if this is something of interest. And that's kind of it. So really quick overview of what we do. I hope it made sense. It's kind of abstract and new. So please, I'll be around the next couple of days. If anyone has further questions, feel free to find me.
So continuing along the lines of extra legal creations of community, we're going to now talk about Copyleft, which as a concept is kind of exemplified by OSSI in the OSSI Pledge. It embodies the freedom to use. All right, we're going to do this again. Okay, so along the lines of extra legal creations of community, we're going to start with copyleft as opposed to copyright. Copyleft as a concept is exemplified by the OSSI Pledge, which embodies the freedom to use, modify, and share seeds, along with the obligation to pass these same freedoms on to future users. So the question then becomes, can you share how these principles, Jamie, can you share how these principles have influenced your approach to your work and your contributions to preserving agricultural biodiversity? You want us to come up here? Awesome.
See everybody here. How's that? Well, first I'd like to thank my co-presenters because that was really new territory that was really good to hear about. A lot of debate and legal opinion and creative brainstorming went into forming the open source seed initiative. And if you want to know about that, I would refer you to the Wild Garden Seed website, which has numerous essays about that process. If you are interested in listing a seed and want to know what a breeder would have to do to register as a pledge as an open source variety, that's very simple, clear information on the OSSI site, and I would refer you there. I'm speaking from my experience of change and how it comes about and why I think that OSSI is a viable tool for change in our present predicament. And maybe if you can see, maybe you can see my vision better if I share with you that I lived in the wilderness in Alaska for 25 years with no boat or float, with only boat or float plane access, no road. And so my neighbors were nonverbal in human terms, but they were very much my neighbors. And one day there was a huge commotion outside my cabin, and I went out to see what was going on. And a mink, which is a pretty big animal with really sharp teeth, was cowering next to a stump surrounded by dozens and dozens of tiny birds and squirrels and mice. No one of those creatures, no 5 of those creatures could have stopped that mink. But when it tried to rob the nest and the whole forest came and rallied around that nest, that outcry drove away the predator. And that's the premise behind OSSI, is that when someone tries to steal your stuff, you get the whole playground to shame them.
So we got a late start. I'm not suggesting that anybody go anywhere. I'm just suggesting that you know that we got a late start and we're gonna be running a little long, so adapt accordingly.
So I'm neither a vegetable breeder nor a theorist nor a legal scholar. I sell seeds. I'm in daily touch with ordinary people who grow food for themselves and their communities. I run a very small seed company called Quail Seeds, and I sell about 40 OSSI varieties. I've been marketing OSSI seeds since the initiative was launched in 2014. I'd like to answer one nuts and bolts question right away, and then I'm gonna mainly leave the nuts and bolts to the literature that you can find in your packets. Yes, it's practical. We're a small outfit. We hand pack all our seeds and have no fancy printing or packaging. Even with limited resources, it's practical to include the pledge in the variety descriptions online and put the logo on the packet label. And yes, people do notice and they do respond. For the customer, it's useful information along, just like non-GMO project or free trade. It helps them make their decisions about how they want to, what they want to support in the world. For the breeder, it's a potential way to have recognition for their work and give notice of prior art. We in this room appreciate that the issues around intellectual property are really complex and many. We can see that no one rule fits all situations. But in society at large, these issues barely exist. Even among farmers and gardeners, ordinary people don't track down the provenance of their seeds or wonder about the legalities, which nonetheless shape their lives. If we want to resolve the problem of genetic privatization rather than having a solution thrust upon us, we have to give that issue a name. And we have to bring it before the citizenry and out of the piles of documents. OSSI is a way that both the moral right of the breeder to recognition and the right of the community to our genetic heritage can be brought into public consciousness, debate, and resolution. Our world is full of people yelling at other people about what they ought to do. Opinions are cheap. But when people hear that a breeder has worked to develop a variety and then freely given it to the public domain, that's a powerful moral example. It's the kind of example that's propelled successful movements for justice all over the world. It speaks in a way that no legal argument can. This isn't the first time that I've worked in an industry that was threatened by privatization, by loss of small producers, and by the erosion of genetic diversity. For 25 years, I was a commercial fisherman in Alaska. When farmed salmon hit the market, the genetic integrity of salmon runs over much of the Pacific Rim was threatened. Corporate takeover of existing markets threatened to destroy whole communities and replace hundreds of small producers. Over a 5-year period in the 1980s, the price to the fishermen of coho salmon off the boat fell from $2.25 per pound to 35 cents. In response, fishing permit holders got permission from the state to hold a referendum just amongst ourselves. Every permit holder got a ballot. It was counted by the state. We voted to assess ourselves 3% of our gross to put our case before the public. We invoked the power of example by putting our own money into habitat enhancement and sustainable management. We invoked the power of naming to give our problem some reality in people's minds so that they could then take action. We coined the term wild caught, and people responded. Today, those same fisheries support thousands of small producers and dozens of viable towns and villages. I think OSSI is a valuable tool because it's human. It's not the only tool, but it's one that works the way people work. We talk together. We share stories. We give people respect based on their actions. We make moral and ethical judgments for ourselves and shape our behavior accordingly. We value fair play and we value community. That's just how people are. That's what people aspire to. In the short term, people use strategies that work for them within existing legal and economic frameworks. In the long term, cultural values shape those frameworks. OSSI is a place where we can start living the future that we want. In the words of the IWW organizers, the Wobblies, who fought corporate power a century ago, we can start building the new society within the shell of the old. And that's why I'm working for OSSI.
Okay, so now we're gonna do a temperature check. We're gonna temperature check repeatedly through this, okay? So we have roughly another half an hour. Okay, roughly another half an hour for question and answers. So the mics are open because me asking you all questions is going to slow things down. Okay. Does anybody have questions? The mics are open.
This on? Yes. Sorry, I forgot your name from local contexts. Would you,
Amy June.
Amy June, thank you. Would you mind explaining the difference between traditional knowledge and biocultural and why someone would choose one label or one class of labels versus the other?
For sure. I think I wasn't present for the creation of that distinction. They're not necessarily distinct in my mind. But I do think that they were developed as separate levers to pull for communities. So there are 20 traditional knowledge labels and 10 BC labels that all sort of represent different interests. Some of those are more tailored to plant material, eDNA, these sorts of things. So I think that is just sort of the practical distinction. It's not necessarily like a philosophical one of what is TK and what is not. And we use TK specifically because that's what's represented in UNDRIP and all of these other sort of norms. But thank you for your question. End of the day, let's go.
Right? It's like, anyone?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say this session is really, I'm just really thankful for the three of you. And I've been thinking a lot about this, coming here and grappling with why can't we redefine three words: intellect, property, and rights? Why can't we redefine those words? And I just think the three of you knocked it out of the park. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen.
So my question is for Helena Gonzales.
I have a question.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was first. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to meet you. Helena, it's an honor to meet you in person. Thank you so much for being here. Helena. Well, I don't know. I don't even know you, Amy, but Helena was my student. I feel so proud. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And also, she's collaborating me with that research we are doing. Amazing. This question is for you. I am very curious because you were kind of the only one that mentioned the Native American approach to private property. And you say that is pretty much inconsistent with the values. So I'm very curious of your personal, I know we only can talk in personal name, but your personal thoughts about both the open source, open seed source initiative in your right with Mrs. Jamie, and the labeling that Amy is presenting, like what from that logic of no private property on sacred cultural heritage, what those initiatives, how they resonate on you. Thank you.
I really think there's no easy answer for that. But I can say that there are some things that align. Part of indigenous teaching with seed sharing is that seeds are for people. Seeds are for feeding others and for sharing. It's important to have the voices of indigenous people involved in making decisions about seeds and other things that are traditionally part of the cultures. But we also have to remember the core ideas of things, that seeds are meant for food, for people, and for nourishment. Native Seed Search took the policy with that idea in mind. That was what was originally the idea of the founding of Native Seed Search, was to conserve and to share. And with the no private ownership, that also aligns with Native values as well, that there's no singular ownership, but a collective ownership and conservation and stewardship. Did that answer your question?
Well, maybe this is the space, but I don't know. But I have a conflict with both, honestly, with both approaches to labeling, fair trade, all of them. Like with labeling, because it comes from a Western, very Westernized mentality. I just knew about your project, but, and at the same time, you showed that you have contacts in my country, in Colombia, and I have seen people there fighting for their rights not to be appropriated for anthropology or for this clothing, fancy fashion factories, that they just go to our people and they take whatever they want and they make amounts of money out of it. And at the same time, Aussie, I know is well-intentioned, and I talked with Mr. Bill Myers, he's here in one conversation, and I know is, I don't know in depth, besides what I have listened from them, but I think it also validates in their own way the idea of property for protection, but I am still own something. So in my opinion, and I cannot talk in the name of communities, but in my opinion, I think that for open pollinated seed, what would be like the policy should be no ownership. No, at all, at no level, for no reason, for nobody. That's my opinion. But as many of my colleagues say, in this context of United States, specifically in Western societies, is not possible. But I don't know, that's my thing. So yes, it answered my question from your perspective, but bringing the dialogue to the wider community here, that is my answer back. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So my question is for Helena Gonzales at Native Seed Search, but it's a broader question as well too. I noticed that you operate across the US-Mexico border, and I know that there's a lot of laws and phytosanitary requirements and international treaties conditioning the movement to seed across international borders. Can you speak to how your organization, how that affects the work that you do, and any thoughts you have?
That greatly affects the work that we do, because we can't reach those communities, and we can't have the free trade of seed across the borders that have been put through indigenous lands and through native communities. So facilitating that isn't possible at the moment. The best we can do is offer seeds to those who are in the communities in the United States. From there, people have their own ownership of their traditional seeds and can move them through the communities the way that they wish to. We have been able to grant seeds to communities, and they've been excited to bring them back into their traditional lands, their villages that they once came from. But we're unable to do that directly.
You.
Well, I have a question from online. She says, my name is Itzia Ochoa. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. I'm from Mexico. So far, we have been able to avoid the access of GMO corn to Mexico, but the people of my community would like to protect the variety of indigenous corn that we grow in our area in case GMO does enter Mexico in the future. Do you have any suggestions in order to be able to do this?
When it comes to keeping that separation, there are precautions that can be taken. You can distance yourselves from those that you know might be potentially growing, and if you can't distance yourself physically, there's also distancing time of growing. If those can't be done and you have questions of whether something may have crossed or whether something was in the past crossed, there are resources you can reach out to. Universities will do work like that where they'll check seeds, whether they have any crossing that was done previously with other GMO crops. But the best that people can do to prevent that is to grow the corn as far away from others that are growing any corn as possible. Because 2 miles might be sufficient, but not always is it enough.
In terms of legal protections, I think that perhaps what we've proven throughout the day is that there's no perfect system. And that includes local context. It doesn't solve for everything. I think that we consider these labels to be extra legal tools for Indigenous communities to name the rights that they would like to be respected. But again, it's not a legally binding system. And until we develop a global initiative that is legally binding, whatever that looks like internationally, I think we're seeing right now in our own government that international agreements are paper. So yeah, I don't think it exists yet. And I think that is sort of the challenge of this time, is to think really critically about what that could look like and start to sort of birth those systems. So nothing comes out of thin air. We have to start to act on that and work cooperatively across borders. So organizations like Native Seed Search, Borderlands Restoration Network, so much amazing work is happening down on the border and operating across those sort of political lines. And I love to see it. And I want all of us who aren't involved in that work to educate ourselves better and learn from those examples. So thank you, Helena.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to just also share that at the 2022 Seed Growers Conference that was held virtually, we had several panels about just this subject. Those recordings are available on OSA's YouTube channel and in Organic Seed Commons, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, there's lots of good initiatives happening in Mexico around these issues. Absolutely.
I'm glad you provided that context because well, first of all, I just wanted to commend all of you for bringing what's really a new perspective on the whole idea of ownership and seed, and really, just a little context. Like, I've been to every organic seed growers conference and been in the space since the mid-90s as a full-time farmer and seed grower. And the way, at least my assumption was, the consensus was we all approached that seed belonged in the commons and belonged to everyone, was came from nature, came from creator. And the idea of ownership or restrictive things was just, you weren't playing the same game. Things have changed. The industry got interested in organic. And I remember I've been growing seed for other seed companies and then started a seed company back in 2009. And a number of us, we just, as seed keepers, we wound up with all these varieties that had indigenous heritage, tribal names associated to them. And I'd been friends with Rowan White for a number of years. We'd done some teaching at each other's farms. And I was like, and at the time she was the head of the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network. And a few of us, Ken Green and others in the space that'll be here probably tomorrow, we were like, hey, Rowan, wouldn't it be cool if we had like a standardized thing of like how to play nicely in the space? Like, let's say we're playing ping pong. There's rules to ping pong. And Rowan's like, well, first of all, like, you just don't understand. There isn't like Native Americana, like these are individual nations and some people have different relationships to the seed. So for myself, of having a forward-facing seed company, we just chose to rematriate those varieties. We sent a bunch to Native Seed Search and other tribes with folks I've become friends of. I was on the board of the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, and we used to do that seed summit down in New Mexico. And we just kind of took a step back and like, there's a lot of varieties out there. We don't need to be in that space. I'd rather be friends with everyone. But I wanted to bring forward a bold kind of statement question from my friend and colleague, Gary Nabham. We were hanging out at EcoFarm last month down in Monterey. And in his book, Where Our Food Comes From, he makes the statement that 99% of the improvement for all of our useful plants was completed 300 years ago. And whatever we've done in that last 300 years amounts to less than 1%, to the point we're kind of here like all having different perspectives. And that's how I see it. I see, seed belongs in the commons, and it's interesting to hear of a refresh of a new way to approach it. And I'm thankful for that. But I'm just curious, with that kind of bold statement from Gary Nabham, who co-founded Native Seed Search, where does that leave us when there are a lot of people that are wanting to play in the space with a whole litany of restrictive intellectual property rights on seeds?
True. Yeah, nothing new under the sun is kind of the question, right? Like, if everything is derivative, then what is left to innovate, and what is left to, is that sort of, am I understanding your?
Yeah, well, and I'll add just like a little caveat. I'm on the board of directors of the Open Source Seed Initiative. I bred a few dozen varieties. I'm a very amateur plant breeder. And that's why I believe anything I've worked on, here, have it. Like, it's for everyone. You don't even need to give me credit. So I'm kind of approaching it like it is possible to innovate, improve, but then, kind of where do we go from there? And that's where I think the open source idea makes sense to me.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
As far as when we start talking about timelines, when does the commons start for you?
That's a good question. And I hadn't really heard anybody bring in the commons. If we go back to what was before the Industrial Revolution in England, there was what was called the Glorious Revolution, about 1680. And that's when really private property was first codified in law.
Well, no, I'm talking about in the United States, where we stand. When does the commons start for you?
In my heart, it never stopped. But as somebody that earns a full-time living growing seed, there's a weird, how do we do this? How do we have people devote their life to being full-time farmers and then get compensated for it? So I feel like there's a gray area for me. I guess that's the best answer I have to your question.
I think what Shanda's pointing to is that the concept of the commons is necessarily sort of a project of sort of Europe, right? And there's something that pre-existed here in which seed was held by communities, but not in the framework that in order to have the commons, you have to have like feudalism and all of these other things that sort of made that function. There's something even older that was here before colonization that I think applying the concept of the commons to, say, indigenous seed keeping, they're sort of incongruous, even though maybe on the surface they seem really harmonious. They're not quite the same thing. And there is, I think, a necessary distinction. Sort of to your question, I think we always have to honor and acknowledge where all seeds are indigenous to somewhere. Provenance is really important. So how do we continue to innovate and improve indigenous varieties? It has to be determined by the indigenous communities, right? And that's sort of the question that I was asking earlier is like, what happens if someone says no? And that's happened in my working with a crop breeding program. On my way out of an ethnobotany project, I finally heard back from a community that they had checked in with their elders and they said, you should not be working with this plant. So what do you do with that information when all of this stuff is sort of in progress, when you've already been working on tomatoes for 30 years or something like this? It's a really good question, but there's so many angles to come at it that I think the commons is a little bit different than what a lot of indigenous communities are sort of conceptualizing or remembering and reclaiming in their communities, speaking only for myself and the communities that I'm a part of. But yeah, there's so much there. Yeah, I'll pass it.
So it's really difficult to take apart and really answer straightforward.
A little bit louder.
Oh,
They're not able to hear you.
there is no one answer. But yeah, recognition and honoring the original seed keepers is one way to move forward with that. There are a lot of crops that were shared around the world that contributed to economies of the globe and for feeding people, and bringing in the recognition to who stewarded those and what hands they now go into and how we should properly care for the seeds, the varieties that we have is also important in moving forward, because not only are we thinking of the past, but we're thinking of being the stewards, the ancestors now in today. It's not only about what happened in the past and how we're going to sort things out now, but how we're going to be able to make sure that we can pass things down into the future.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a question? Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, just encouragement to stay strong and keep doing the work that you're doing, even though people say it's new and it's, never been done or whatever, but to stay strong in doing it. I wanted to ask a question about your understanding, but specifically to Amy and Helena, around, I hear the questions about like ownership and all of that, but I wanted to hear what you think is the connection between seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, because I feel like that connection of like who gets to eat the food that comes from the seed, which is why you're protecting it to begin with, why anybody protected seeds to begin with was so people could eat. And so I wanted to hear what you might think that connection is in the work that you're doing.
In a way, they're both one and the same. Seed sovereignty to a community does mean food sovereignty. It's important for communities to have that basis. Indigenous communities particularly know the importance of that, and will often reflect that in traditions and teachings, that seeds not only feed us, they're our family, they're our life ways, they're what we revolve around, and it's important to take care of that so that you take care of your communities and that you take care of not only yourself, but your children, your children's children in doing so. So yeah, I think seed and food sovereignty are one and the same.
It's a good question. I think one is predicated on the other. So if we lose the seed sovereignty that we are trying to hold on to now, we lose our food sovereignty. So when I think about food sovereignty, I think specifically about educating farmers. That might be youth, that might be somebody who's 50 years old and raising a garden for the first time because they finally have access to land. But if people don't know how to go from seed to seed, we lose everything. is how I feel about it.
Okay, we are at the hour. And so we're gonna move into the debrief.